You know that feeling when your world completely falls apart on what's supposed to be the most wonderful day of the year? Well, let me tell you about the Christmas that changed everything for me. My name is Sarah, and this is the story of how my husband's betrayal led to the most epic revenge plot you've ever heard. Trust me, you're going to want to stick around for this one because what happens next will blow your mind. It was Christmas Eve, and I was in our kitchen putting the finishing touches on our traditional holiday dinner. The smell of roasted turkey filled the air. The Christmas tree was twinkling in the living room, and everything seemed perfect. I had spent weeks preparing for this day, making sure every detail was just right for our family celebration. My husband, Mark, had been acting strange for the past few weeks, but I chalked it up to work stress. He worked in finance and always got overwhelmed during year-end. Little did I know, he was planning something that would shatter my heart into a million pieces. As I was setting the table with our best china, the same set we'd received as a wedding gift 10 years ago, Mark walked into the dining room with a look I'd never seen before. His face was cold, distant, almost cruel. He cleared his throat and said words that still echo in my mind today. "Sarah, we need to talk. I want you out of this house by tomorrow morning." I dropped the gravy boat I was holding, and it crashed to the floor, splattering brown liquid everywhere. The sound of breaking ceramics seemed to mirror what was happening to my heart at that very moment. I stared at him in complete shock. "What are you talking about, Mark? It's Christmas Eve. What's going on?" My voice was shaken, and I could feel tears starting to form in my eyes. He looked at me with no emotion whatsoever and delivered the blow that would change everything. "I've been seeing someone else for 6 months now. Jessica from my office. She's pregnant, and I want to start a family with her. I need you gone so she can move in." The room started spinning around me. 10 years of marriage, and he was throwing it all away for his secretary, who was half my age. But here's where it gets really twisted. Mark had the audacity to hand me a check for $5,000 and say, "This should be enough to get you started somewhere else. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." $5,000 after 10 years of marriage, after I had supported him through law school, after I had given up my own career dreams to be the perfect wife. The man I thought I knew, the man I had loved with all my heart, was standing there, treating me like some kind of inconvenience he needed to dispose of. I want you to pause for a moment and imagine how you would feel in this situation. Can you picture the devastation, the betrayal, the complete disbelief? Comment below if you've ever experienced something similar. Because what I'm about to tell you next shows that sometimes the universe has a way of evening things out in the most unexpected ways. That night, I packed a small bag and checked into a hotel downtown. I couldn't stop crying, couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about how Mark had planned this whole thing, how he had been living a double life for months while I was completely oblivious. How he had let me plan this Christmas dinner, knowing he was going to destroy our marriage right before we sat down to eat it. The cruelty of it all was almost unbearable. But, as I sat in that cold hotel room, something inside me began to change. The sadness was slowly being replaced by something much more powerful: determination. You see, Mark had made one crucial mistake in his calculations. He assumed I was the same naive, dependent woman he had married 10 years ago. What he didn't know was that 3 years earlier, my grandmother had passed away and left me her entire estate. I had never told Mark about the inheritance because I wanted to surprise him with it someday. The inheritance wasn't just a small sum either. My grandmother had been a very successful businesswoman who had invested wisely her entire life. She left me exactly $2.7 million. I had kept this money in a separate account that Mark knew nothing about. I had been planning to use it to buy us a bigger house, maybe start the family we had been talking about. Instead, I was about to use it for something completely different, something that would teach Mark a lesson he would never forget. Are you starting to see where this is going? Because trust me, what happens next is absolutely diabolical. The next morning, which was Christmas Day, I drove back to our neighborhood. Not to beg Mark to take me back, not to cause a scene, but to execute a plan that had been forming in my mind all night. Our house was a beautiful colonial in an upscale neighborhood where houses rarely went on the market. But as fate would have it, the house directly next door to ours had a for sale sign in the front yard. It had been on the market for 3 months because the asking price was steep, $1.9 million. I called the real estate agent right from my car, even though it was Christmas morning. I told her I was interested in making a cash offer immediately. She was shocked that anyone would want to look at houses on Christmas, but when I mentioned cash, her tone changed completely. We met at the house an hour later, and I fell in love with it instantly. It was actually nicer than the house Mark had kicked me out of. It had 5 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a gourmet kitchen, and a backyard that was twice the size of ours. But the best part, the master bedroom window had a perfect view directly into Mark's home office where he spent most of his time. I made a full cash offer on the spot. $1.9 million. No financing, no inspections, close in 7 days. The seller, who was desperate to move before the new year, accepted immediately. Can you imagine the look on Mark's face when he found out his ex-wife had bought the house next door? But I wasn't done yet. Not even close. While the paperwork was being processed, I decided to do some investigating into Mark's new relationship. It turns out Jessica wasn't quite the innocent young woman Mark thought she was. A little digging on social media revealed some very interesting information. Jessica had been married before, and her ex-husband had filed for divorce, citing adultery. She had a pattern of targeting successful married men and breaking up their families. She had done this twice before Mark, and she was very good at it. But here's the really juicy part. Jessica wasn't actually pregnant. I hired a private investigator, and we discovered that she had been faking the pregnancy to manipulate Mark into leaving me. She had been using fake ultrasound photos she found online and padding her clothes to create the illusion of a growing belly. The woman was a professional homewrecker, and Mark had fallen for her act completely. I started documenting everything. Every lie Jessica had told, every piece of evidence showing the fake pregnancy, every detail about her previous marriages and affairs. I was building a case that would not only expose Jessica for who she really was, but would also show Mark just how foolish he had been. And the best part, I was going to have a front row seat to watch it all unfold from my new house next door. Comment below if you think Mark deserved what was coming to him, because this story is just getting started and the revenge is about to get so much sweeter. On New Year's Eve, exactly 1 week after Mark had kicked me out, I got the keys to my new house. I spent the day moving in, making sure to do it when Mark was at work so he wouldn't see me coming and going. I wanted the reveal to be perfect. That evening, as Mark was coming home from what I assumed was a New Year's celebration with Jessica, he saw lights on in the house next door for the first time in months. I was standing in my new kitchen, which had a window that looked directly into his kitchen. When I saw him pull into his driveway, the confusion on his face was priceless. He knew the house had been for sale, but he had no idea who had bought it. I watched him walk around his yard, trying to get a better look at who his new neighbor might be. When he couldn't see anything, he went inside, and I knew he would be watching from his windows to catch a glimpse of whoever had moved in. I decided to give him a little show. I opened all my curtains and turned on every light in the house. Then I walked from room to room, making sure he could see me clearly. The moment of recognition was absolutely perfect. I watched through my window as Mark's face went from curiosity to confusion to complete shock. He stood frozen in his kitchen for at least 5 minutes, just staring at my house in disbelief. Then came the phone calls. My phone started ringing nonstop. Call after call from Mark, all of which I ignored. Then came the text messages. Sarah, what are you doing? How did you buy that house? We need to talk immediately. This is insane. I let him stew for 3 days before I finally responded with a simple message. Hello, neighbor. But the real entertainment was watching Mark try to explain to Jessica why his ex-wife was now living next door. Through my windows, I could see them having heated arguments every night. Jessica was clearly not happy about this development, and Mark was struggling to maintain control of the situation he thought he had handled so neatly. 2 weeks into January, I decided it was time to start phase 2 of my plan. I began having contractors come to my house to do renovations, not because the house needed them, but because I wanted to make noise and create activity that would drive Mark crazy. I had landscapers redesigning my yard, painters working on the exterior, and construction crews building a beautiful gazebo in my backyard that would block Mark's view of his own garden. Every morning at exactly 7 a.m., the construction would begin. Every evening, at exactly 6 p.m., it would stop. I made sure the work was loud enough to be annoying, but perfectly within the legal noise ordinances for our neighborhood. Mark couldn't complain to anyone because technically I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was just improving my property. Have you ever seen someone slowly lose their mind? Because that's exactly what was happening to Mark. His perfect plan to start fresh with Jessica was being completely derailed by my presence next door. He couldn't escape me, couldn't avoid the constant reminder of what he had done, and couldn't control the situation anymore. What do you think I should do next? Should I reveal Jessica's lies immediately, or continue to let Mark dig himself deeper? Share your thoughts in the comments because this psychological warfare is just getting started. The breaking point came in February. I was in my backyard, supervising the installation of a beautiful outdoor kitchen, when I heard shouting from Mark's house. Through the windows, I could see Mark and Jessica having the mother of all arguments. She was yelling about how she couldn't take living next to that psycho ex-wife anymore, and Mark was trying to calm her down. But then I saw something that made my blood boil. Jessica threw something at Mark, something that shattered against the wall. Even from my yard, I could see that she had thrown one of the ceramic Christmas ornaments I had made for Mark during our first year of marriage. Ornaments that held precious memories of our early relationship. Ornaments that Mark had promised to treasure forever. That's when I decided it was time to end this charade once and for all. I had been patient, I had been strategic, but seeing my handmade ornaments being destroyed by this lying manipulator was the last straw. It was time for Jessica's house of cards to come tumbling down. I printed out every piece of evidence my private investigator had gathered about Jessica. The fake pregnancy documents, the photos of her previous affairs, the testimonies from her ex-husbands about her manipulative behavior, everything. I put it all in a manila envelope and waited for the perfect moment to deliver it. That moment came on Valentine's Day. Mark had gone all out for Jessica, filling his yard with roses and hiring a string quartet to play outside her window. It was over the top and ridiculous, especially considering he had never done anything, even remotely romantic like that for me during our entire marriage. But it was also the perfect opportunity for my grand reveal. As the string quartet was playing and Jessica was standing on the balcony pretending to be surprised and delighted, I walked over to Mark's front door and rang the bell. When he answered, his face immediately darkened. "Sarah, what do you want?" he asked through gritted teeth. I handed him the envelope with a smile. "Happy Valentine's Day, Mark. I thought you should know who you're really serenading." Then I walked away without another word, leaving him standing there with the envelope in his hands. I went back to my house and watched from my window as Mark opened the envelope. I saw his face change as he read through the documents. I watched him look up at Jessica on the balcony, then back down at the papers, then up at Jessica again. The romantic music was still playing, but the mood had definitely shifted. What happened next was better than any movie I've ever seen. Mark walked out into his yard, still holding the papers, and looked up at Jessica. "Is there something you want to tell me?" he called out. Jessica, still playing her part, called back, "What do you mean, honey?" Mark held up the ultrasound photos. "I mean, how is it possible that you're 6 months pregnant? But these ultrasound photos are dated from 3 years ago and belong to a woman named Michelle Rodriguez from Phoenix, Arizona. Do you want to know what Jessica did next? Comment below with your guess. Because her reaction was absolutely priceless and shows exactly what kind of person she really was. The look on Jessica's face was pure panic. She tried to laugh it off. At first, "Mark, honey, I don't know what you're talking about. Where did those papers come from?" But Mark was already reading more of the evidence. He learned about her previous marriages, her pattern of targeting successful men, and most damaging of all, the testimony from her ex-husband describing exactly how she had faked a pregnancy to manipulate him too. Jessica tried to run damage control. She came down from the balcony and tried to grab the papers from Mark, but he pulled away from her. "Don't touch me," he said coldly. "I want you to explain every single thing in here, starting with how you're supposedly carrying my child when you've never actually been pregnant." The string quartet was still playing their romantic music while this drama unfolded, which made the whole scene even more surreal. Jessica finally broke down and started crying, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of anger at being caught. "Fine," she screamed. "You want the truth? I'm not pregnant. I never was. But you were so easy to manipulate, so desperate to feel young again, that you believed everything I told you." Mark's face went white. "You mean I destroyed my marriage, threw away 10 years with Sarah, for a lie?" Jessica's response was chilling. "Your marriage was already over, Mark. I just helped speed up the inevitable. Men like you are all the same. You get bored with your wives and start looking for something exciting. I just gave you what you were already looking for." But Mark wasn't done uncovering the truth. He kept reading through the documents, and his face grew darker with each page. "It says here that you've done this 4 times before. For other marriages, you've destroyed. For other families, you've broken apart." Jessica shrugged like it was no big deal. "So what? Those men made their own choices. I didn't force anyone to do anything. I have to admit, I was enjoying this confrontation immensely from my window seat next door. But the best part was still coming." Mark suddenly looked up at my house, and for the first time since this whole mess started, I saw genuine remorse in his eyes. He was finally understanding the magnitude of what he had done, not just to me, but to himself. Jessica noticed where Mark was looking, and her whole demeanor changed. "Oh, don't tell me you're thinking about going back to that pathetic woman. She's been stalking us from that house, probably planning some kind of revenge. She's clearly unstable." That comment made Mark angry in a way I hadn't seen before. "Don't you dare talk about Sarah like that. She's twice the woman you'll ever be, and I was an idiot for not seeing it." Mark turned away from Jessica and walked toward my house. I quickly moved away from the window, not wanting him to see that I had been watching the whole thing. When my doorbell rang, I took a deep breath before answering it. Mark was standing on my porch, still holding the papers, looking completely defeated. "Sarah," he said quietly, "I owe you the biggest apology of my life. I was wrong about everything, about Jessica, about you, about what I thought I wanted. I threw away the best thing that ever happened to me for a lie." I looked at him calmly and replied, "Yes, you did." He seemed surprised by my composed response. I think he was expecting me to either slam the door in his face or break down crying. Do you think I should have forgiven him right then and there? Or do you think he needed to learn his lesson the hard way? Let me know in the comments what you would have done in my situation. "Can we talk?" Mark asked. Can I come in and try to explain? I shook my head. Mark, you made your choice on Christmas Eve. You chose to believe a stranger over your wife of 10 years. You chose to kick me out of our home on the most important holiday of the year. You chose to start a relationship with someone you barely knew. Those were all your choices, and now you have to live with the consequences. Mark's eyes filled with tears. But I know the truth now. I know I made a mistake. The biggest mistake of my life. Can't we try to work this out? I felt a moment of sympathy for him, but then I remembered the sound of that gravy boat hitting the floor on Christmas Eve. I remembered the humiliation of being handed a $5,000 check like I was some kind of employee being laid off. I remembered watching him laugh with Jessica while I was crying, alone, in a hotel room. Mark, I said firmly, some mistakes can't be undone. Some choices have permanent consequences. You didn't just cheat on me. You planned this whole thing. You let me cook Christmas dinner, knowing you were going to destroy our marriage before we ate it. You chose her over me not once, but every single day for 6 months. And now that you've discovered she's not who you thought she was, you want to come back to me like I'm some kind of backup plan. I could see the realization hitting him that this wasn't going to be as simple as apologizing and asking for forgiveness. So what happens now? He asked. What happens to us? I smiled and said, there is no us anymore. Mark, you made sure of that, but don't worry about me. As you can see, I'm doing just fine. From inside Mark's house, we could hear Jessica screaming and throwing things. She had realized that her meal ticket was disappearing, and she was not handling it well. Mark looked back toward his house with dread. I guess I need to deal with that, he said. I nodded. Yes, you do. Good luck with that. As Mark walked back to his house, I closed my door and smiled. Phase 3 of my plan was about to begin, and it was going to be the most satisfying part yet. But first, I wanted to see how Mark was going to handle getting Jessica out of his life. This was going to be interesting to watch. What unfolded over the next few hours was like watching a train wreck in slow motion. Jessica had completely lost control when she realized that Mark was no longer under her spell. She started throwing things, screaming at the top of her lungs, and making threats. I could hear everything from my house, and I'm sure the whole neighborhood could too. Mark tried to reason with her at first, asking her to pack her things and leave quietly. But Jessica wasn't going anywhere without a fight. She had invested 6 months in this con, and she wasn't about to walk away empty-handed. She demanded money. She demanded half of everything in the house. She even threatened to sue him for emotional distress. But Mark had finally seen Jessica for who she really was, and he wasn't falling for any more of her manipulation tactics. He called the police and had her escorted off his property. As the police car pulled away with Jessica in the back seat, Mark stood in his driveway looking completely lost. The next few weeks were fascinating to observe. Mark was clearly struggling with the reality of what he had done. He would come home from work and just sit in his car in the driveway for long periods, like he didn't want to go into his empty house. He had gotten rid of Jessica, but he had also lost me, and I think the full weight of that was finally hitting him. He tried reaching out to me several more times, but I didn't respond. I had moved on, and I wanted him to understand that. I started dating again, and I made sure he could see my new social life through my windows. I would have friends over for dinner parties. I would go out on dates with successful, attractive men, and I would come home laughing and happy. I was genuinely enjoying my new life. The house was perfect. My financial situation was better than it had ever been, and I was free from a marriage that had clearly run its course. Mark had actually done me a favor by showing me his true character before I wasted any more years with him. What's your opinion on this situation? Do you think I was being too harsh, or do you think Mark deserved everything he got? Share your thoughts in the comments, because the story isn't over yet. 3 months after the Jessica drama ended, Mark did something that surprised me. Instead of continuing to try to win me back, he put his house up for sale. At first, I thought he was just trying to escape the awkwardness of living next door to me. But then I found out the real reason, through neighborhood gossip. Mark was struggling financially. It turns out that Jessica had been very expensive to maintain. She had run up huge credit card bills in his name, had convinced him to lease her a luxury car, and had even convinced him to take out a loan against the house to pay for what she claimed were pregnancy-related medical expenses. Mark was drowning in debt, and selling the house was his only way out. But here's where the story takes an interesting twist. Remember how I mentioned that houses in our neighborhood rarely go on the market? Well, Mark's house was beautiful, and I had always loved the layout. It was actually the house I had wanted when we first moved to the neighborhood, but it hadn't been available at the time. So I made Mark an offer he couldn't refuse. I offered to buy his house for cash, 20% above market value, with a quick close. Mark was desperate, and my offer would not only get him out of debt, but also give him enough money to start over somewhere else. The irony was delicious. I would own both houses, controlling the entire corner of our beautiful street. Mark would be completely gone, and I would have the perfect setup for whatever came next in my life. Mark accepted my offer immediately. We went through lawyers for everything, and we barely spoke during the entire process. The day he moved out, I watched from my window as he loaded his belongings into a moving truck. He looked up at my house one last time before driving away, and I could see the regret written all over his face. Now I owned both houses, worth a combined total of about $4 million. I had turned my grandmother's inheritance into a real estate empire, and I had removed all traces of my past with Mark from my life. But the best part was what I decided to do with Mark's old house. I converted it into a retreat center for women. Going through difficult divorces, I partnered with local lawyers and therapists to create a program that would help women rebuild their lives after their marriages ended. The house that had once been the symbol of my failed marriage became a place of healing and empowerment for dozens of other women. The program was incredibly successful. Women would come to the retreat for week-long intensives where they would work with counselors, financial advisors, and life coaches to create plans for their futures. Many of them were in situations similar to what I had experienced, feeling lost and powerless after being betrayed by their husbands. Seeing these women transform during their week at the retreat was incredibly fulfilling. They would arrive broken and scared, and they would leave with confidence and clear plans for their futures. I had taken the worst experience of my life and turned it into something that could help other women avoid the same pitfalls. But the story doesn't end there. 6 months after Mark moved away, I got a phone call that would add one final twist to this entire saga. Can you guess who was calling me? Share your guesses in the comments before you continue reading. The call was from Jessica. She had somehow gotten my number and wanted to talk to me. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her for coffee. I was curious about what she could possibly want to say to me after everything that had happened. Jessica looked terrible when I saw her. The confident, manipulative woman who had stolen my husband was gone, replaced by someone who looked desperate and defeated. She had clearly been struggling since Mark had kicked her out. I wanted to apologize. She started, but I cut her off immediately. Jessica, I don't need or want your apology. You did me a favor by showing me who Mark really was. If anything, I should be thanking you. She looked surprised by my response. But I ruined your marriage, she said. I laughed and replied, no, you revealed that my marriage was already broken. Mark made the choice to betray me. You were just the tool he used to do it. Jessica seemed confused by my attitude. I think she had expected me to be bitter and angry, but I had moved far beyond that. I heard about what you did with the houses, she said. That's pretty impressive. I smiled and said, yes, it worked out very well for me. I'm much happier now than I ever was when I was married to Mark. Jessica looked even more confused. Don't you miss him at all? I thought about her question for a moment before answering. Jessica, I miss the man I thought Mark was, but that man never really existed. The real Mark is someone who could plan a betrayal for months and execute it on Christmas Eve. The real Mark is someone who could be manipulated by a stranger into throwing away 10 years of marriage. I don't miss that person at all. Jessica started crying then, and I realized that she was probably expecting me to commiserate with her about how awful Mark was. But I wasn't interested in bonding with her over our shared experience with him. What do you want from me, Jessica? I asked directly. I want to know how you did it, she said. How you bounced back so quickly. How you turned everything around and came out ahead. I looked at her and realized that this was probably the first time in her life that one of her schemes had backfired so completely. Jessica, I said, I succeeded because I had something you don't have, self-respect. I had a foundation to build on. I had real accomplishments, real relationships, real worth that existed independently of any man. You've spent your life defining yourself through the men you can manipulate. When that stops working, you have nothing left. I stood up to leave, but before I walked away, I decided to give her one piece of advice. If you really want to turn your life around, stop looking for someone else to take care of you and start taking care of yourself. Get a real job, build real skills, create real value in the world. Stop being a parasite and become a person worth knowing. I left Jessica sitting in that coffee shop and never looked back. I never heard from her again, and I never tried to find out what happened to her. That chapter of my life was completely closed. What do you think of how I handled that final confrontation? Was I too harsh, or did Jessica need to hear those hard truths? Let me know in the comments. 2 years have passed since that Christmas Eve when Mark kicked me out, and my life is unrecognizable from what it was then. The Retreat Center has helped over 200 women rebuild their lives after divorce. I've written a book about my experience that became a bestseller. I've been invited to speak at conferences about financial independence and life after divorce. But most importantly, I've learned to value myself in a way I never did when I was married. I realize now that I had been diminishing myself for years, trying to be the perfect wife for a man who didn't appreciate what he had. I had been so focused on making Mark happy that I had forgotten to make myself happy. I'm in a relationship now with a wonderful man named David who treats me like an equal partner. He knew my whole story before we started dating, and he admires how I handled the situation. He's never tried to take care of me or fix me because he recognizes that I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself. The houses are now worth even more than when I bought them, thanks to some strategic improvements and a hot real estate market. I've been approached by several developers who want to buy the entire corner, but I'm not interested in selling. This is my kingdom now, built from the ashes of my old life. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Mark had never betrayed me. Would we have stayed married but miserable? Would I have ever discovered my own strength and independence? Would I have ever helped all those women who have been through the retreat program? In a strange way, I'm grateful for what happened. Mark's betrayal forced me to discover who I really was, underneath the role of wife I had been playing for so long. Jessica's manipulation showed me what I didn't want to become, and buying those houses taught me that I was capable of much more than I had ever imagined. The woman who got kicked out of her house on Christmas Eve was vulnerable and dependent. The woman I am now is strong, independent, and in control of her own destiny. Mark thought he was discarding me like an old piece of furniture, but he actually set me free to become the person I was always meant to be. And as for Mark, I heard through mutual friends that he's dating someone new, a woman his own age, who has her own successful career. I hope he's learned from his mistakes and is treating her better than he treated me. I don't wish him ill, but I also don't think about him very often anymore. He's just a character from an old story that led to my much better new story. If you're going through something similar right now, if someone has betrayed you or abandoned you or made you feel worthless, I want you to know that this might be the beginning of your transformation, not the end of your story. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the catalyst for the best thing that happens to you. Your comments and engagement with this story mean everything to me. Have you ever had an experience that seemed devastating at the time but turned out to be a blessing in disguise? Have you ever had to rebuild your life from scratch? Share your story in the comments below, because we're all stronger when we support each other through these difficult transitions. Thank you for taking this journey with me. Remember, you're more resilient than you think, more capable than you know, and more deserving of happiness than anyone has ever told you. Sometimes you have to lose everything to discover that you already had everything you needed inside yourself all along. Don't forget to like this story if it resonated with you, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe for more stories about overcoming life's biggest challenges. Until next time, remember that your current situation is not your final destination. The best is yet to come.